Hello, everyone. First of all, I would like to introduce our fabulous moderator for this evening. Edlira Chapani was one of the brilliant speakers at the Women.Our Forum last year, where she talked passionately about the many challenges that are facing women in politics in the world today. And that's why this year we wanted to do a whole session on that specific topic. So Edlira Chapani is a lawyer, a human rights activist, and since 2012, she has been the elected chairwoman of the Women's Network Equality in Decision Making, EDM, the first network of its kind in Albania. She has been contributing for more than a decade as an activist for gender equality in Albania, working as a gender expert to promote women's rights and equal opportunities in all fields of life. We're very excited that you're going to be part of this, Chapani, and helping us moderate this session. So I'm just going to pass it on to you and let you introduce our first speaker.
Camila, thank you very much for organizing this meeting. Tonight's topic is a topic that we usually discuss in many other circumstances. We never discuss about women in politics in the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, because as we said the last time that we met, sometimes when we speak about women, empowerment of women in decision-making, women in politics, and of gender equality in politics, we speak of empowering the empowered. But from what we will hear tonight, we'll see that women in politics face their challenges, face their own difficult path to breaking the glass ceiling, the famous glass ceiling that we haven't yet broken. It's my pleasure to introduce the speakers of tonight, women in decision-making that work with women in politics, brilliant women that are great role models. Allow me to start with a wonderful politician, a good friend, Teuta Bodo. She's a policy maker and a researcher who has served in many executive positions in the national and international area. Teuta is the author of several scientific publications and articles of the Judiciary versus Public Policy and Comparative Constitutional Reforms, Minority Rights, and Secret Evidence. She teaches geopolitics in the University of Troyes in France and EU law in the Mediterranean University of Albania. And we are so happy to have you, Teuta, with us today. And I immediately give you the word. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I am very honored to be here with you. I could enjoy so much your speech from last year, Why to Empower the Empowered. And well, I was so tempted since I've to have a follow-up on this. Indeed, I believe that we have to answer some questions, especially from our male colleagues. Like, what do you want more? Like, they believe that we are already empowered. The numbers are there. Today, the Albanian government is one of the governments with most women in either the parliament or the government or independent agencies. So indeed, statistically, we're there. The quality is increasing as well. So indeed, there are a lot of major steps which are done. I come from the Socialist Party, which it is in its ideology as well, and in the vision of the Prime Minister and the party leader to promote women. And indeed, there is so much which has been done so far. There was a phase during my career where I was really empowered. And by this, I mean that I was promoted in the government level and at the same time in the party level, which means that I was very much empowered, reinforced. So why would Edlira or her colleagues worry or be concerned about people like me? I'm already one of the privileged ones. So I'd like to point out a bit like how it is important, how misunderstood is the concept of gender equality and feminism. Very often, we have somehow come up with the idea that we should be equal to men, and there should be the same wage, the same check pay, and same equal opportunities, and so on. And a lot has been achieved. And one of the points that we don't discuss so much is the process itself. So, and this is what makes us different from our male colleagues. First of all, when there's a promotion of a male colleague, you do know very well that they're not questioned like how they got there. Whereas it is very much questioned, whereas when you're a woman to start with. And while you're serving in the position, either in the government or in the parliament, what I've been observing is that my female colleagues, they would observe much more the process. So not only the outcome is important, the process itself is very important. We can see this in even in the macro level, like what has been achieved, the performance, the indicators. This is what we have been observing the most. And while we reach the citizens, which was our case, for example, while I was serving in the government, in my role as a Deputy Minister of Justice, one of the tasks that I have to observe the most was the property agencies. So we had some talks with the citizens, which were faced with this big challenge, not only in Albania, but mostly in the post-communist countries. So it has been the promise of the government to solve this issue, which actually tackles the human rights portfolio. And so how to approach the citizens, how to explain them. I can observe, and I could enjoy to see this difference, that very often the citizens, it's not just the result that they get, but it's the whole process. I have seen that especially while my female colleagues are serving in the parliament, they are very much dedicated to see like what's going on during the process. But let's face it, the parliament is divided into some mini groups, and the government as well. Or I do serve as a city councillor in Tirana, and it's the same there as well. So what can you do, and how can you reinforce women when men, they have always been there? I mean, yes, we do have the numbers now, but it hasn't been always like this. It means that men have been there for a longer time. So there is a much stronger solidarity among them rather than with us. And of course, women, because they're new there, so instead of seeing each other mostly as partners and as, well, playing in the same team, very often there is this not very healthy competition. So how can we change this? How can we strengthen, or how can we turn this around? It is not easy. It's not easy. It has just some decades ago, in some countries, women could not even vote. And let's not forget that in Saudi Arabia, women could vote only 6 years ago. It was only in 2015 that they finally obtained their right to vote. So it is quite new. And so how can we do something different, and how can we make the difference in comparison with our male colleagues? And I do believe that in this moment for us, it is very important, the relational power. What I mean by this is that while our male colleagues, they would, well, have a much more classical approach and get to the outcome themselves, we do have an additional point, which is the process, and this is obtained through the relational power. This is obtained by building a much more compassionate behavior with either our staff or with our colleagues, or with our with our bosses or with citizens especially, which actually would reinforce this view. And this, I believe, would change very much this the result itself. So I do believe that in comparison with now, some decades later, all this will be taken for granted. We know that this is how much we're taking for granted now, the right to vote and so on, whereas it was not the case. So I do believe that it is up to us to actually reinforce this emphasis and to think of the forms of power. And this is what makes the difference in comparison with how it has been so far. I'll just give an example, since it's much better when I illustrate it. The intervention of the US in Afghanistan or in Iraq has always been very focused on the result itself. Well, among others, bring democracy there. Whereas the feminist approach has been to see like what's going on. And there were so much abuse from other political class, which were supported by the Western society. So why am I mentioning this? Just to see like how we can bring this difference in the world and how it can be important for all of us to see it with a naked eye, to see like what's going on during the whole process. And this is how I see it. I believe that Albanian politics still have a lot to go and a lot has been achieved. And I'd like to have more people like Edlira who would reinforce the role of women in Albanian politics and in other arenas where democracy still has to be reinforced.
Thank you for this great view and also sharing some personal experience. I would love to pass to the next speaker, brilliant leader, and one of those that really leads by example. Heather Nicola Staff. Heather has been working for many years as a political advisor on refugee, asylum and migration policy for members of the UK Parliament. She is the Labour Party Council candidate for Islington and the Women's Officer for Bansbury World Labour Party in Islington. A strategic thinker with a passion for international development and cross-cultural work, Heather works on projects around the world and is an executive member of a number of organizations. She's also a keen musician with a love of bass guitar. I know that your experience in politics and your contribution has been very vast. So we are eager to hear your opinion and what do you think about this topic, and maybe also some advice.
Thank you so much, Adira, and as always, you're far too kind for how you describe me. Yeah, I would say, I mean, added to my bio there, you just said about being a newly selected council candidate for one of the wards in Islington. So actually, Camilla also asked me before I started, why would I get involved in politics, and particularly when there is abuse and everything else that has happened to women. And being a new candidate for the election for next year, I'm acutely aware of the abuse that you can have as a woman, and particularly online abuse when you stand up and are counted to be a candidate. But I thought I would take you back to where Camilla asked me to start and to say, what was your passion to get involved? Why, as a woman, be involved in politics? And it's a very good question. I think as women, it's not a career you're encouraged to go down very often. In fact, I remember a conversation at the dinner table once and was told very clearly to get off my soapbox, meaning don't talk about this. It's not polite discussion to talk about politics. You're a young girl. Why are you having these thoughts? Why would you want to raise that? My careers advice in school, I grew up in quite a rural community, was literally to marry a farmer. It wasn't to be a doctor or a lawyer or to go into politics. They said marry a farmer. That was my careers advice. I'm glad that didn't happen, because I'm not very good around cows or pigs, so that'd have been a disaster. But I went to university and I discovered a love of law, of international development, of something else out there. And I saw women who were involved in politics from Pakistan. The person who taught me law, I think she was the first female Pakistani judge to go to the United Nations. So it was a massive inspiration to be around people like that. We had somebody called Germaine Greer, who is quite a controversial feminist author, who taught me as well. And they were people that really engaged my love of public life. And then later on, when I became a political advisor and went into the Houses of Parliament in the UK, I was very blessed to have a fantastic boss, who was a while ago, she got promoted to be the Shadow Education Minister and then came out of that. But she was a brilliant role model who dealt with abuse very well. Now, in the UK, we have a relatively balanced parliament. There's still a long way to go. And in my party, we have, again, a fairly balanced, what we call the shadow cabinet with women. But there are so many barriers to being in there. Daily, as an advisor, I look at the comments on, I work for 2 MPs, so male and a female. The female MP gets the most horrific comments, much more different to the male MP. You know, his will be very much maybe about what he said, that he swore on Twitter. Hers will be about her appearance. There'll be nothing about policy or what she said. It's all about how she looks, what they might want to do to her. All these horrendous things, and they're the things as an advisor you have to make sure they don't see daily, and you have to be aware as, what do I report to the police? You know, will the police take this seriously as well, as a woman? And it's very telling that as women you receive much worse comments than men who are around you. I also, not in an abuse sense, but for myself, I remember walking into many meetings being asked if I was there to serve the tea. You know, oh, you're going to make the coffee, you're going to make the tea, and you're like, no, I am the political advisor. I'm here to tell you what to do. Or it was a comment about, you know, what do you wear? I remember in the Houses of Parliament, a police officer actually came up to me and he grabbed my collar of my shirt that I'm wearing now, and he started to fiddle with it. And he said, oh, you need to make your collar straight. I was like, would you do this to my male colleague? Absolutely not. I had a security officer who walked in our office when we thought we had a bomb threat. It wasn't, thank God, but he walked in, and instead of dealing with the potential bomb threat, he asked for my number to go on a date. So it's little things like that as women we have to work through in politics. I thought I might also start with some figures as well, if that's all right. So there was a survey recently by a local London paper, and this relates to me and I guess why I wanted to be a candidate, but it said 58 female and 22 male councillors were surveyed about their experiencing of witnessing or being victims of gender-based abuse. They found that 45% of male councillors witnessed abuse towards their female colleague, which wouldn't happen to them. While men said they experienced some kind of abuse, they said it was usually much less than their female counterpart. 70% of female councillors said they were no longer safe to have their address made public, branding its current availability outrageous, and contributed to the abuse they and their families would face. And the home address of a councillor is normally available, and it's something I would need to think about. Is that something I'm going to do? Will I make my phone number available? You have to also fight to get that removed. And again, why are there these issues in politics for women? Why do we have to think about, is my address public? Is my phone number public? What am I going to do in this situation? And there were some other figures as well. So something called the Fawcett Society said that around 7 in 10 women said they would not become a politician because of fears of facing abuse and harassment. They also said 6 in 10 women think that sexism in local politics is a barrier to pursuing a political career. And 7 in 10 said problems juggling work as an MP or a councillor with other responsibilities in their lives would be an obstacle. 6 in 10 said a lack of confidence to offer themselves up would hold them back. And then there was another article in the Independent as well, and it said it's even worse if you happen to be female and Black or gay, for instance, in which case they said that Black, Asian and minority ethnic female MPs are subject to far more online abuse than their white peers. And a previous study by Amnesty International showed that Black female MPs and journalists were 84% more likely to be mentioned in abusive tweets than white women. So it's not just about the fact that as women, we have to work through this when we're in political life. It is also add to that ethnicity, sexuality, and religion on top of that. So, you know, what I guess where I wanted to land on was, what do you do about that? Why still go into politics? You know, we talked about empowering the empowered. Are we really that empowered? You know, if this is what we face on a daily life when we're in politics, do I have to worry about, you know, what will my family do if I receive abuse? Do I really need the number of the local police officer to do my job on this way? Where are we with social media, for instance, as well? So I think there has to be much more done around education and supporting one another. And just to end, I want to pick up on something Tayuta actually said, which I really liked, and it was about the role of women supporting women. And often you're right, Tayuta, what happens is we feel like we have to push each other out the way. We have to be stronger than the other woman to get ahead, or we have to be more aggressive. We have to hide abuse just to be seen as doing our job. I would say that that's wrong. I think we have to get alongside each other. We need to support one another and to be sisters in that, to actually say, I'm here, I'm going to help you in this process. And always make sure that you have somebody who can read the comment section under Facebook or Twitter or whatever it is, so that you are not the person having to deal with whatever is coming at you. But I would say for myself, at the moment, I would still say it's worth it for us to be there. But we absolutely need the support to do that, and we need help working through social media particularly, and police officers and security taking it much more seriously. Thanks, Adira.
Heather, thank you so much. With your vast experience in politics, of course, as we heard, challenges are a lot, and I think that these are mutual challenges for all women and girls that dare to run for politics and dare to be part of the decision making. I will just take a sentence from your speech with a call for not to hide abuse, but to fight the abuse and to fight it all together, supporting each other. One of the other questions that we get all the time when we ask for more women in politics, we ask for empowerment and we ask for more quotas, is where are the women? And based on some studies that we have undertaken lately, and also in media monitoring, we see that women are there, but we don't see them enough in the media. To speak about this, we are very honored to have Julia Bicknell. She worked as a BBC News presenter, reporter, and producer for over 30 years in different programs as dreams.Our, radio and TV. And she was a foreign reporter from Pakistan, from where she also reported the Afghan refugee crisis and launched also a radio soap opera. In 2006, she returned to Afghanistan to train women to launch Afghan Women's Hour. She regularly works with politicians and has been part of the movement in the BBC to get more women's voices onto the airwaves, now formally known as the 50-50 Famous Project. Ms. Bicknell, we are so honored and happy that you have joined us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Adlira. And I'm really glad that people have mentioned the media, because actually there's been a massive change in the BBC. I can only really speak for the BBC and for the UK because that's where I live and that's where I hear most of my media. But I want to say that, in fact, even before Camilla asked me to speak tonight, I was actually noticing recently, as I was listening to the main morning news, the financial news was read by a woman and discussed by a woman. The sport was produced and presented by a woman. The BBC's current chief political editor is a woman. The chief international correspondent is a woman, who in fact I worked closely with when I was in Pakistan. So you might ask, as Tutor did, well, what more do you women want? You're here, you've made it. And as you mentioned, Edlira, I used to produce a program called Women's Hour. And this was back at the end of the 80s. And at that time, people would say, do we need an hour devoted to women? Why do we sort of partition them off into the special hour that we give them? Now, part of the reason for that hour, and part of the reason why the women who worked there, who were indeed all of us were feminists in those days, part of the reason why we felt that it was necessary to have a program like Women's Hour was that it discussed issues of relevance and importance to women that men didn't even know about or think about discussing. And so that comes back to your question, if you'd asked me, why do we need more women in politics? We need more women in politics simply because women are half of the population. They hold up half the world, in the famous Chinese phrase, and yet they don't actually get to discuss their issues. So I just want to take a little bit of time to quickly talk you through how that changed, certainly as I said, I can only really speak for the BBC media because I was involved in it. So in those days, back in the end of the 80s, you just didn't hear women as experts on the BBC. You didn't hear them analysing the news. You didn't hear them analysing politics. You just didn't hear them as academics. And we at Women's Hour had a mandate, and that was that every time we discussed any issue of any interest, we would always go out of our way to find the woman expert on that issue. Even if we only had men that we were aware of who knew about that topic, whether it was nuclear power or whatever, we would go and find a woman. And we were not allowed to come back to the programme and have someone speak unless she was a woman. And that was a very specific way of getting women's voices onto the airwaves. And so over time, and it took a long time, the kind of influence of Women's Hour seeped into the other programmes through the BBC. And then gradually it began to be taken up more formally outside Women's Hour. And there was this kind of pressure to find a woman, in the mainstream news and current affairs. People would say, well, hang on a minute, we always have that man. There's a phrase in the UK at the moment, which my husband quotes at me. We sometimes say people in our media or in our public life are male, pale and stale. Pale meaning white men and stale meaning we've heard them too often. And that is a phrase that we were sort of told in through the 90s in news and current affairs programs. No, we can't have that man that we always hear, that same professor. Let's find a young woman professor, or if not a professor, a senior lecturer. And that way we started just making it a task. Now that is actually hard work because you don't necessarily know of those women. They may be in departments, I think, as you were saying, Heather, they may be around, but you're just not aware of them. And over time, we started bringing these women in. And actually, you know what? They were pretty good. They knew their stuff. In fact, probably typically to get to the position they were in, whether it was an academic or a senior policymaker, they probably had to be better than the men to even be in their position in the first place. And so they started appearing on the air, and they weren't sort of disappointing. They weren't shaming us. And so eventually this project came to be a formal project, and it got a title, and it was called, as you mentioned in your introduction, the 50-50 Project. And the idea is now that women should be roughly 50% of all voices and appearances on mainstream television and radio, certainly as far as the BBC is concerned. I apologise for my emails pinging if you can hear them. If not, don't worry. And so that was a sort of a conscious effort. And I remember in thinking about preparing for this, I remember, the kind of questions that we had in the 80s, will we be allowed to do this? And the answer was, we have to. And what's happened now, and I've just, again, noticed it just in the last few days, even in our parliamentary discussion amongst our women politicians, because women are now getting to be more confident, because there's more young women like Heather around Parliament and in positions as MPs. Guess what? The issues that affect women in their daily lives are getting talked about more than ever on the media. And I'll give you a couple of quick examples. Heather will know the case of Stella Creasy, a woman MP, who was in the news quite a lot last year when she was pregnant, but she's now had her baby, and I think the baby's about 3 months old or something. Heather, you'll have to correct me. But there was recently a debate about whether she should be allowed to bring the baby into the debating chamber. And that's something that someone like Maggie Thatcher, when she was Prime Minister and was, had 2 children, that was never an issue. People never talked about, even the idea of thinking about a woman bringing a child into Parliament would not be even discussed. We've also discussed in our Parliament the issue of women being recognised when they're going through the menopause. There's some people being very seriously affected in their health, whether it's their physical health or their mental health, and whether there should even be a case for women to be able to be allowed to take time off if they're experiencing serious symptoms of the menopause. Now, that would never have been discussed as possible legislation a few years ago. And then the last one, which was pertinent to me, as I shared with a few people this morning, and you can catch up with it on Facebook later, I hope, is the whole issue of if women and men, but primarily I would argue women, have a miscarriage before 24 weeks in the case of the UK legislation, should she be allowed to take leave as bereavement leave? A lot of women arguing, actually, when you lose a much loved expected child or baby, even if it's before 24 weeks, that should be treated as a bereavement. And so I think this is the answer. Why do we need more women in politics? Because the politicians are the people who basically work our lives out for us. How do we live together as society? And if you don't have the voices of at least 50% of the society, you're not going to get to the issues. So I'll leave it there, and I'm open to questions. Thank you very much.
Julia, thank you very much. The 50-50 project is really an inspiration to all of us, and we're trying also to push for it also in other countries, and especially in Albania in our work with the women in politics and women in decision making. So thank you so much for inspiring us to do more. Usually we monitor media in order to see how it portrays women and men, and how it portrays especially women and men in politics, and if it reinforces or not the gender stereotypes and gender roles that we usually have in society. And based on our monitoring in the traditional media, we see 20% women discussing in the primetime shows topics as politics, economy, defense, and all this actuality in the prime time, versus 80% men. And on the other side, we see that in the morning shows where we discuss culture, education, and family, and those is what we call soft issues in the media, we see that this percentage is different. So it's more women that discuss those and less men, reinforcing the stereotypes of the gender roles in the society. But this is one of the problems that we have in media. The other problem that we have is that also makes it difficult also for women in politics is the sexism in media and the objectifying of women and girls. Our next speaker, a great politician that has worked for over 20 years at the intersection of academia and political activism. And earlier this year, just now, she has been elected to serve as a city councilwoman for Kettering, Ohio. Joule Hall is our next speaker, who is also an adjunct professor at the United Theological Seminary. In the past, she has worked a lot for many years in social services, including World Vision, World Relief, the Congressional Hunger Center. Jill received her PhD from Asbury Seminar where her research focus was economic challenges in Dayton, Ohio. Jill, we're so happy to have you here with us.
It's really great to be here with some colleagues from around the world and to hear everybody's thoughts. And I did just get recently elected. I'm grateful to have participated in various political campaigns and policy issues most of my adult life, and I'm also involved in academia. So I'm going to talk about some statistics in my presentation, which is my academic side, and then reference some of the political experience as well. And what I really want to talk about is, why is there underrepresentation of women in politics? And this is true in America. It's true mostly globally, but it's not true everywhere. As Tuata, I'm so sorry if I just mangled your name, it said that there's nearly 50% in Albania. There's several countries in Europe where that's true. There's more women in politics in the United Arab Emirates than the United States, in Rwanda, in Mozambique than the United States. So, you know, we are not doing as well as we could. And to answer the question about why we need more female representation, I just want to give one of my favorite statistics about women. And that's every time that women and girls are educated, because in many countries, education isn't even something women are afforded. Every time 1% of women and girls are educated in a country, it increases the entire economic development and well-being of that country by nearly 0.5 percentage point. So there's these exponential benefits to empowering women. Secondly, there's studies in the business world that shows that having women in leadership increases businesses' profits. And unsurprisingly, similarly, there's some unique benefits to having women in political office. Men and women have very different policy priorities. Not saying one is better and one is worse, but there are very important ones that tend to be more female dominated. For example, policies that emphasize quality of life and reflect priorities of family, women, and ethnic, racial minorities. Additionally, women more often, not always, work across party lines. Women work harder for their constituents and spend more time doing constituent services than their male counterparts. Women prioritize education, health, and other key economic development indicators that have a huge effect overall on the economy. And importantly, women emphasize and secure more long-lasting peace. Kofi Annan said, this is an amazing quote. I thought surely I would get somebody else saying this. So I'm so glad I ended up being the first one to say it. Study after study has taught us there is no tool for development more effective than the empowerment of women. No other policy is as likely to raise economic productivity or to reduce child and maternal mortality. No other policy is as sure to improve nutrition and promote health, including the prevention of HIV/AIDS. No other policy is as powerful as increasing the chances of education for the next generation as the empowerment of women. Madeleine Albright also stated, the world is wasting a precious resource in the dramatic underrepresentation of women in leadership positions, often resulting in the exclusion of women's talents and skills in political life. And I think the peace aspect is really important, that having women in negotiations for peace leads to higher chances of successful mediation agreements and sustainable peace. The inclusion of women leads to reduced armed violence and greater conflict management. Women's participation also enhanced how we respond in humanitarian assistance after there's conflict and enhanced protection efforts. The case is easily made that the more women in political leadership, the more healthy the population. So we still only hold a quarter of all positions in politics worldwide. And so that brings me to the problem that I wanted to discuss, which is, why don't we have more women participating? A couple studied reasons are women believe they're less qualified than men, and they're not asked as frequently to run as men. But from my experience, I would also add to this, and there's more and more data being generated, and I'm going to echo a lot of what Heather said here, is that women is the same reason every woman I've ever talked to who has thought about or considered being involved in politics is the fear of harassment, which also has to do with some of the other parts of this conference that Polylogos has done. Women worldwide are twice as likely as men to be victim to online harassment, but women lawmakers are 3 times as likely as men to receive comments containing abusive language. And that last statistic may be just in America, but I think probably not, because this is something that's happening globally. I bet it's very similar. 61% of women running for office believe that the reason that they're harassed is to stop them from running for office. And we're conditioned to accept this as harassment, intimidation is just part of running for office. You know, everyone says it's to be expected. And I'm sure the other women involved in politics would say that, you know, that's part of the package, which is, you know, saying that it's a given shows us how big this problem is and why we need to change it. In my own experience, when, you know, you have to use social media now in political campaigns, and obviously, and in America, it's illegal for us to delete comments on a candidate profile that's a personal attack unless it contains a death threat. And I can't tell you how many comments I've seen towards women that are directed at their personal appearance and that get very personal. When I was running for office this fall, I really enjoyed some great support. But there's the thing that we all fear when we get involved in any social discussion online, which is the personal and derogatory nature of comments that were sprinkled in online. They never had anything to do with reality, what my actual policy priorities were, or even what I was able to do as a city council person. And then to see if it was happening to other women, and I looked at some other women in similar positions or cohorts who were also running around the state, and it was just horrifying. And it was the number one thing all of the people who were first-time people running in my state of Ohio said that was the most difficult part of it. And we've all seen it towards women politicians in any country, including women journalists or women who share political content. There's so many reasons to end online bullying, not least of which is the number one cause of depression in girls. Women work to end office sexual harassment in this country for a couple decades, and although it's far from over, we were successful in really moving the bar from where it was. So we can do this to change things with online harassment and make the internet a safer place. I think that could be accomplished in a few different ways. One is public campaigns and social campaigns, making it socially unacceptable to harass women on social platforms. And the other is, again, reinforcing the need for good governance, and why we need more women in politics is that we have to strengthen laws that prevent online harassment, and we need to prosecute sources of hate speech, including ones that prevent women from running for office. Women who want to run for office or be in political leadership should not have to choose between pursuing that career and their basic human rights. Person after person would say to me, and still says to me, how brave it is to run for office nowadays, in particular. And this is exactly what they're talking about. Women are not running because they don't want to deal with the harassment. So when we as women are safe from fear of online or offline harassment, then democracy is what at stake, when full female representation can flourish without that harassment. And ending it is a major obstacle, or would be a major boon to the involvement of women in politics around the world. And what's at stake and what's we're losing is huge advantages to civic spaces that female governance brings. The payoff is tremendous in any country. So it's an economic decision to protect women from violence in any level when it prevents them from leadership as well. Thanks so much for your time, and I really enjoy being a part of this panel, and appreciate Polylogos putting this together.
Thank you so much for this vast gamma of all what violence against women in politics can be. Sometimes we just see it from a superficial level, and we don't see what is underground and what really women and girls that are in politics might suffer. But this, as you said, should not stop us, but it should make us more eager to fight for the human rights and for more women and girls into politics. And thank you so much. And our last but not least speaker from Spain, she is the project manager of the Women's Network Equality in Decision Making, EDM. She's Raquel Hernandez Peña. In the past 10 years of experiences as a gender equality expert, Raquel has worked with international donors, national, local stakeholders, and public institutions in Albania and abroad. In her work, she has conducted several policy researches on women political participation, political finance, and gender elections and media. She's a long-standing feminist fighting for women's rights. We have so many challenges of having women in politics, which is one of the challenges that in your work you have encountered more as a barrier to the visibility and also to the work of women in politics.
Hello, everybody. One of my main job, part of a civil society organization, is to identify challenges and barriers that women have in their daily work, especially in the field of politics. Through our job, we have identified that one of the challenges are the confidence that the woman have to be able to run, because a woman does not only need to stand and to run for election, but also needs to overcome barriers that are structural and cultural barriers, making reference to a culture of politics that is dominated by men, not having role models of women in decision-making, or enough role models in decision-making, gender stereotypes and gender roles in the process of recruiting and nominating women in the candidate list. Through our process, we have been able to create many strategies to be able to overcome these challenges. I will say that the process of a gender expert, and especially a person who works in a civil society organization, is very organic. So during the process, you ask to the women, what are the needs that you have? What are the challenges? And one of the main things that they were asking at the beginning, it was, I would like to have more skills as a leader. I would like to have more skills as a PR person to be able to speak in public. So what we did is to provide them trainings to them on how to have access to media, how to be a more stronger leader in their position of power, and at the same time to provide an understanding on how local governance and national governance work for them to be able to perform their job. The reality is that during the process that we were pushing so much for them to be able to join the political arena, we found out other challenges in the way. One of them was the invisibility of women in media. And as Edlira was mentioned before, we have been very focused on providing great visibility of women in media, like training journalists, creating a database of women's experts and women's candidates, very, very huge process. One of the most interesting things that we find during the way, it is that when we ask it to women, we make like an open call and we say applications for, and the reality is that nobody applied because no woman referenced themselves as a woman expert. You will ask it to her, why you are not a woman expert? I'm a woman professional, but not an expert. It was very interesting that during the process, we needed to change certain things, to be able to adapt and to attract women to be able to be part of the political arena. Later on, when we were able to integrate it in the counselor, we saw that the women were not speaking up. It's what Edlira was mentioning before, the substantive power. So it means that the number is there, but then you are quiet. You are not able to introduce policy, to ask for budget allocation. So we mentioned and we thought that it was important to provide them trainings on how budgets are done, how policy makings are done, because in the reality is nobody's born a politician. You become a politician. You learn to become a politician along your career. After that, we can see that there are other problematics. And one of the biggest problematics that we have found most recently is money. Money is a big taboo in society, but also in politics. Money is very big taboo. So one of the process that we did it is we need to start to ask candidates, do you have access to money? Is the party providing you money, political party finance or resources? So we have been conducting several studies, one in 2017 that was a parliamentary election, and one more recently in 2021 to understand a little bit more if how much is important the role of money in participation and representation in decision making. One of the biggest find out that we had, it is that in order to run, you need to be nominated. But how are you get nominated? And money is very important in that process, because political parties, we need to understand the way that they are financed. They are financed in one way by public funds and in another way by donations. Donations, most of them come from candidates by networking. So when political parties will nominate candidates, they will nominate those candidates that have huge networking, that have access to resources. But we know one thing, that gender gap pay is a reality. It means that we know that women have less access to money. So how we overcome these issues? So later on, we were asking, okay, so if you are nominated because you have great resources, what are all the problems? So when you are already there and you have part of the party, you have become part of the list, it means that the party is going to start to support you? Are you going to be able to have access to public funds? In reality, in Albania, only those parties who earn 1% of the vote in the previous election will have access to public funds. It means that not all the parties have access to public funds. So we asked it to the people, to the candidates who their parties were had access to the public funds. And the reality, it was that, first of all, more than the 50% of the candidates didn't know that the political parties have access to public funds. They don't have an idea that they are receiving public funds for the election. Second of all, those ones who have the information do not have access. Only 20 persons from all the candidates that we interviewed said that they have access to the public funds. So it means that the public funds are not democratized, are only in the few hands. To still digging in the process, we say, okay, so how the political party is supporting you during the election campaign? And one of the findings that it is that most of the campaign is self-financed. They tell you, 80% of my campaign, I finance it. The party only provides me around 20%. And I say, okay, in which one? What is the support that they provide you? Leaflets and meetings with voters when the leader comes. This is hard, the financial support or the sources support that the political parties do. The rest of the money, the rest, you need to contribute it by yourself, or asking your family, or asking a business for to be able to help you. So basically, you are standing alone. You are a member of a political party, a party who receives money from the state, and you are not receiving a coin from that. It's very interesting how a public fund is not being democratized in all this time. You know, who make the laws make the whole, you know? That is what they say. To continue contributing to understanding the process of access to political finance, we also ask what are the strategies? If you don't have funds and you don't have money, what are the strategies in your campaign? One of the things that we found it is that men focus more of their campaign in their team, recruiting people for their team. That is crucial for them. But in the other side, when you ask to the women, what is your main strategy during the campaign? They will tell you social media. When you ask to them why you are using social media, because to have a team, it costs too much. Social media, I can do it by myself, and most of the time I'm doing it without sponsoring. Have you realized how important is the access to money? Our objective as a gender equality expert and a member of civil society organization is to be focused in this new state, not so much in the gender quota, but in creating a new instrument that is focused on how to democratize the public funds. We call it the gender electoral finance. Let's see if this is going to happen. Before I close, I would like to tell you that most of the time when we speak about money, especially in politics, we don't mention as a way of gender-based violence. It's very understandable to understand not having access to money inside of the family circle as a form of gender-based violence, as a form of control. But not having access to money inside of political party is also a form of gender-based violence. I hope that you have understand, that you have learned something, and to keep going. Thank you.
Raquel, thank you so much. It's indeed a very important issue on which we really need to invest on and really need to be very attentive on. We spoke from Romania, UK, United States, Albania, Spain, and many other countries, and we see that the challenges are kind of the same. But what we also see is that women are so inspiring and fighting so much in every angle of the world. And if we get together and if we support each other, we have shown that we can make a change. And really, women can make a change not only for other women, they can make a change for the whole community. So thank you so much. I would like to start with Teuta in 1 or 2 sentences. Teuta, one experience of your political career.
Actually, I can give you one example. A dear male colleague of mine was showing me a poster in a hotel conference where there was a description of conference on harassment in the public administration in Albania. And he told me, like, look how the EU money is spent. Like, it is worthless. Like, it gives the impression like all this harassment is happening in the public administration. And I asked him, like, what do you think? And he said, like, I never really heard of such a thing all these years, and everything's fine. And this comes, and I believe him that he was sincere in that very moment, because he was a very high level politician, former minister several times. And when you are in a very high level position, there is not such thing as a raw harassment. Nobody ever asked me my phone number. Nobody has ever really asked me like very direct questions. So very often it comes from the very definition of harassment. What is it? It will never, in most cases, especially now that the gender equality has advanced so much, that a colleague or a boss and so on will ever ask you directly a sexual favor whatsoever. It doesn't work like that anymore. This is why it is very difficult to point out. It is very difficult to identify, to tackle it, because it is much more subtle than it used to be. Before, you could actually sue someone based on this, and now it's not anymore the case. So what is it? Can I mention cases like somebody asking me sexual favors and so on and so forth? No, I cannot. I was even trying to think of all these years, like how how subtle it has been. Has there been harassment, subtle harassment? Definitely yes, more than once, more than twice, and so on. And the image that we do have of women, especially of women whose social status or whose civil status, sorry, is not married, is that by having a husband by your side, but not just any husband, but someone with a good social status or financially stable and so on, this would empower us even more. So yes, did I ever had this comment? Yes, from a dear friend of mine who told me, like, you'd have had a much better career in politics if you would have had a potential or very stabilized socially and politically husband, because this would have given you a much stronger position. And was he right? Well, yes, because we still live in a world where Beyonce, maybe she wouldn't have been so famous and successful if Jay-Z was not there. We still live in a world where much of the power still belongs to men. So most women have already been by the side of men, which there's nothing wrong with it. But this is how they mostly picture us. We may be good at what we're doing, we may be passionate, we may be very outcome driven, but still it would help to have not an accessory, but how actually men are actually looked at. Like having a wife would be mostly an accessory, but for us, having a husband would be actually like the very foundation of our success. So in this case, yes, I have felt several times this kind of discrimination, which in most cases would come with somehow an ironic or maybe this is based on the traditional view and approach and mindset of Southern societies. Probably, I don't want to categorize so much, but indeed, you can feel it, But to the young girls out there, I would say that you should be interested in politics, because politics is about everyday's lives. It makes a difference. And
Yes, sir.
as Adlira has mentioned once, it's like a bird flying with one wing.
Thank you, Tauta, for this answer. Challenges are there, but we can fight them. There is also another question: is emphasizing being a woman a successful campaign strategy? Either, if you want to say something of the last question or of this one.
Thanks, Adira. Yeah, I think I'll take both actually, but very quickly with the why should women be involved in politics? I think the best way to describe it is if you'll forgive me a quick analogy. So my flat where I live in Islington is very small, but it has no storage. Like there is nowhere to put things I need. And the landlord is male. So my flatmate and I have a running joke that if this flat was a female landlord, we would have storage, like, because they just think differently. As a woman, you would know we need somewhere to put things. As a male landlord, it's just a property. You don't worry about it. And the same if you go in a hotel. I don't know if you've noticed this in hotel rooms. There's never a mirror where you want the mirror to be. The mirror is always way away from plugs or helpful things. And it's because the vast majority are designed by men. So when I go campaigning, often I take with me my neighbours' children for the same reason, because their eye line is different to my eye line. They see things that I would miss out and about in the community. So I ask them, what are you seeing that I don't? And that's when you have women in politics, you bring a different perspective. And Julia said it, we're half the population, and Jill did as well. But I think it's important to say we can't sit here and complain about I don't have time to vote, or why are all the votes in the UK Parliament, you have to be physically present, they're late at night. The only way to change that is by having a female voice in there saying we need remote voting. Or the only way I change Labour Party procedure in voting in potential candidates is by being a woman to say, actually, what about the woman that has childcare that can't get to that meeting? Or I'm a woman of faith, so my church meets at 11 o'clock on a Sunday and everybody else is going out campaigning at 11 o'clock on a Sunday. Which do I choose? So you absolutely need women in politics to have that different perspective. Otherwise, you're going to end up, and to go back to that analogy again, into a flat with no storage, like, and mirrors in the wrong place. You have to have different people in to hear different voices. And just quickly on the women, emphasizing a woman in a successful campaign strategy, it depends on where you're campaigning. It depends on what your aim is. For me, when I went for selection last week, being a female candidate was incredibly helpful, because there were 3 spots. One of those spots had to be a woman because we have this equal representation in Islington. A vast majority of the area I was standing in is female. It also helps me to emphasize my faith. 51% of Islington in London is Christian. So that helped as well. So it really depends where you are, and what you want to talk to. As a woman being a candidate, it also means I'm less of a threat going out talking to people. When I knock on doors, people let me in to speak to me in a flat. They don't let my male colleague in, particularly because he happens to be a Muslim. So, you know, I hate that, but I am the white, small woman. I'm not a threat to people going and speaking. So it can really help. In other cases, I don't think it's very helpful to necessarily emphasize gender. So what I would say is use your own wisdom and logic. Thanks, Adira.
Thank you, Heather. Julia, on the question, or as a final sentence?
Well, I think the only thing I want to add is just a quick story. I think you'll know the phrase, be the change you want to see. And I was thinking back many years ago now, probably getting on for 20 years ago, I had the opportunity to work with a woman, people in the UK will recognize her name. She's called Sarah Montague. She presents one of our main programs. And I needed to take her to Sweden, or in fact, for the Nobel Peace Prize award ceremonies. And Sarah said, I can't come because I'm breastfeeding. But I can come if you'll let me bring the baby. And now that was adding stress to my job as a producer to make everything work for her to bring her baby. But basically I thought, I've got to do this. It's going to make sense. You know, Sarah's going to be a great presenter. And we made it work because I was a woman producer. Now, would she have felt able to ask a man to do the same? Maybe not. But I think that's the point. We've got to be the change ourselves, haven't we?
Thank you so much. It's true indeed. Jill?
Yes, the question that you gave me involved what other reasons are preventing women from running for office, and everybody has touched on it. The 2 other reasons, in addition to harassment, is they don't feel they're qualified and they aren't asked to run for office. The good news from that is that women are equally as likely as men to win when they run for office. They're also equally as qualified as men when running for the first time. However, even with having the same qualifications, only about 50% of women feel they're qualified, which Raquel mentioned some of what that looks like in Spain, and 75% compared to exact same qualifications, 75% of men think they're qualified. However, in the United States, there's an important elected office in the US where this is not true. And I don't actually know, and I couldn't find any good info on how this works overseas, but we get our school boards, or our board of elections, are elected positions. So in each city, you have a school system for that city, for the public schools, and the people who oversee public schools is an elected position. And we'll have 6 people maybe who are elected for that position. And in school boards, 43% of women are, 43% of the people in school boards in the United States are held by women, especially in some of our larger districts. So this is a great place in the United States for party leaders to recruit women to take the next steps to run locally or statewide. They then have the experience and the qualifications to run for office. And that may just apply to the US, but I think also in other countries, there's also things called parent-teacher organizations where people are located in private groups, and heads of parent-teacher organizations would be a good choice as well to find women to run for office.
Thank you, Jill. And one last quote from Raquel.
I will say that our generation is a generation who have break many taboos. It's a generation who have started to speak up, to share very intimate situations where we have been harassed, we have been discriminated. And I think that the path to change and to achieve gender equality, it will be about speaking up, to be with each other, to be able to raise our voices together.
Thank you so much, Raquel. Thank you to all our speakers and to our great participants for listening to us. We hope most of all that we inspired you more to be part of decision-making, to speak up more, and to be part of the change, and for you to be the change.
Thank you so much, Edlita, and thank you to everyone who was here participating. And thank you especially to the speakers. I am really honored that you would choose to come and take from your time and be a part of this event. You've made it really beautiful, and I appreciate you. We will come back with new Women in Power Forum events. Maybe we'll have some events that are also for men to be involved, like we got the question about today. We are continuously growing, and we are continuously learning, and we are actually in the process of rebranding. So just so you know, the next time you are a part of this, we might be here under a different name, but it will still be us. Thank you, Edlita, for moderating this event so beautifully. And thank you, everyone.